I stared at the roast chicken cooling on the dining table, my appetite already gone before dinner even began. The scent of rosemary and garlic filled our modest home in Austin, but tension saturated the air more thoroughly than any seasoning ever could. My younger sister Jasmine sat across from me, her phone screen illuminating her face in the dimming evening light. She scrolled through apartment listings with theatrical sighs, each one louder than the last. Mom hovered near the kitchen doorway, wringing a dish towel between her hands like she was preparing for battle. Dad cleared his throat. That sound alone made my shoulders tense. "Vivian, we need to discuss something as a family," he began, carving into the chicken with precise, deliberate movements. "Your sister's situation has changed." I set down my fork carefully. "What situation?" Jasmine finally looked up from her phone, and I caught the gleam of triumph in her eyes before she masked it with false vulnerability. "My lease ends next month, and rent prices have gotten insane. I can't afford anything decent in my budget. There are plenty of affordable places if you look beyond downtown," I said evenly. "Those neighborhoods aren't safe," Mom interjected quickly. "We've been discussing alternatives." The word "we" rang alarm bells in my head. I had not been part of any discussion. Dad continued cutting his chicken, not meeting my eyes. "The most practical solution is for Jasmine to move back home temporarily, just until she saves enough for a proper place." I waited. There had to be more. "The thing is," Dad said, finally looking at me, "she'll need your room. It's bigger, has the attached bathroom, and frankly, it's more suitable for someone who'll be working from home. You've been here since college, Vivian. Maybe it's time you found your own place anyway." The words hit me like a physical blow. I was 28 years old, worked 60-hour weeks as a pharmaceutical sales representative, and paid $500 monthly in rent to my parents. Not much by market standards, but I contributed significantly to household expenses and had never missed a payment. "You're asking me to give up my room?" My voice came out calmer than I felt. "We're asking you to be reasonable," Mom said. "Jasmine's your sister. Family helps family." "I've been helping this family for 6 years," I replied. "I paid for Dad's dental work last year. I covered Jasmine's car insurance for 8 months when she was between jobs. I bought the new refrigerator when the old one died." Dad's jaw tightened. "We're not asking you to tally favors at the dinner table. No, you're just asking me to leave." "Nobody's asking you to leave," Mom said, though her eyes told a different story. "You could take Jasmine's old room. It's smaller, but you're barely home anyway with your work schedule." I looked at Jasmine's old room in my mind, barely large enough for a twin bed and a dresser, with a window that faced the neighbor's brick wall. I had painted my current room myself 3 years ago, installed custom shelving, and created a space that finally felt like mine. "And if I say no?" I asked. The silence that followed answered my question more thoroughly than words ever could. Dad set down his knife and fork with deliberate precision. "Then perhaps it is time you found your own place. You're almost 30, Vivian. Most people your age aren't living with their parents. Most people my age weren't guilted into staying home to help with family expenses," I countered. "That's enough," Dad said sharply. "We've made our decision. Either move to the small room and let Jasmine have yours, or find your own apartment. We're not debating this." I looked at my mother, waiting for her to intervene, to say this was too harsh, too sudden. She avoided my gaze, picking at her own plate. Jasmine, to her credit, tried to look sympathetic, but I saw the satisfaction lurking beneath her concerned expression. She had always been their favorite, the creative one, the free spirit who needed understanding and support, while I was the reliable one who needed nothing. "How long do I have?" I asked quietly. 2 weeks should be sufficient," Dad replied, returning to his meal as if he had just discussed the weather rather than displaced his daughter. I stood from the table, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "I'll be out by the end of the week." "Vivian, don't be dramatic," Mom started. "I'm not being dramatic. I'm being practical. You've made your priorities clear." I walked to my room, my soon-to-be former room, and closed the door behind me. My hands shook as I pulled out my laptop and opened apartment listing websites. The cheapest one-bedroom in a decent area started at $1,500 monthly. Studio apartments in questionable neighborhoods went for $1,200. My phone buzzed. A text from Jasmine. "I'm really sorry about this. I didn't think they'd make you leave." I deleted the message without responding. The next morning, I called in sick to work, the first time I had done so in 18 months. I needed a clear head and uninterrupted time to plan my next move. The situation had crystallized something I had been avoiding for too long. I had spent 6 years putting my family's needs before my own future, and I had nothing to show for it except a room I was about to lose. I drove to a coffee shop 3 miles from home, ordered a large black coffee, and opened my laptop. My savings account showed $43,000, money I had accumulated through careful budgeting and the occasional bonus from exceeding sales targets. I had always told myself I was saving for something important, but I had never defined what that something was. Now I knew. I spent 3 hours researching real estate markets, mortgage rates, and investment properties. Austin's housing market had exploded over the past 5 years. Homes that sold for $200,000 were now worth $400,000 or more. My parents' house, purchased 20 years ago for $180,000, was now valued at approximately $550,000, according to recent comparable sales. They had mentioned once, years ago during a wine-fueled dinner conversation, that their dream was to eventually upgrade to one of the newer developments on the west side of town. Specifically, they admired Westlake Hills, where modern homes with hill country views sold for several $1,000,000. Dad had driven us through the neighborhood twice, slowing down in front of a particular contemporary-style house with floor-to-ceiling windows and a 3-car garage. "That's the kind of place we'll retire in someday," he had said wistfully, "when we finally make it." That memory sparked an idea so audacious I almost dismissed it immediately. Almost. Instead, I opened a new browser tab and searched for properties in Westlake Hills. Most were far beyond my reach, but I was not looking to buy there. Not yet. I was looking for information, for possibilities, for leverage. My phone rang. Work. I silenced it. By noon, I had contacted 3 mortgage brokers and 2 real estate agents. My credit score was excellent, 780, and my income history was solid. One broker called me back within an hour. "Based on your financial profile, you could qualify for a loan up to $400,000, she explained. "But I'd recommend staying under $350 to keep your monthly payments comfortable. Are you looking at any particular neighborhoods?" "I'm flexible," I said, "but I work in pharmaceutical sales, so I need good access to highways and medical facilities." We scheduled an appointment for the following day. That afternoon, I returned home while my parents were still at work. I packed my essential belongings, clothes, documents, laptop, a few sentimental items, into 3 large suitcases and 4 cardboard boxes. Everything else could wait or be replaced. Jasmine's car sat in the driveway, but she was nowhere to be seen. Probably hiding in her room, avoiding confrontation. I loaded my belongings into my sedan, making 3 trips. On the final trip, I paused in the doorway of my room and took a long look around. The soft gray walls I had painted, the floating shelves I had installed, the reading nook by the window where I had spent countless quiet evenings. None of it was really mine. I understood that now. I left my house key on the kitchen counter with a brief note. "Moved out early. No need to wait 2 weeks. Good luck with everything." Then I drove to an extended stay hotel near the medical district and checked in for a month. The room was sterile and impersonal. A queen bed, a small desk, a kitchenette, a bathroom that smelled of industrial cleaner. But it was mine, paid for with my money, and nobody could take it from me. I sat on the edge of the bed, and let myself feel the anger I had been suppressing since dinner. Not explosive rage, but cold, focused fury. My parents had chosen Jasmine's convenience over my stability. They had dismissed 6 years of contributions and loyalty as if they meant nothing. Fine, if they wanted me to leave and make it on my own, I would do exactly that. But I would not do it quietly, and I would not do it small. My phone buzzed with texts. Mom. Vivian, where are you? Your key is on the counter. Dad, we need to talk. This is childish. Jasmine, please call me. Mom's freaking out. I turned off my phone and opened my laptop. The real estate agent had already emailed me a list of potential properties. I scrolled through them methodically, dismissing anything that did not fit the specific criteria forming in my mind. Then I saw it. A 3-bedroom townhouse in a decent neighborhood, listed at $295,000. Below market value due to minor cosmetic issues, outdated kitchen, worn carpets, a bathroom that needed retiling. Nothing structural, nothing I could not fix with time and modest investment. But more importantly, it was in a neighborhood that was rapidly appreciating. New businesses were moving in. A light rail extension had just been approved. In 2 years, properties there would be worth significantly more. I bookmarked the listing and continued searching. I also started researching property management companies, real estate investment strategies, and home renovation contractors. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. By evening, I had a plan. Not just for surviving on my own, but for building something my parents could never take away. For creating the kind of security and success that would make their choice to dismiss me into the biggest mistake they had ever made. I thought about that house in Westlake Hills, the one Dad had admired so openly. I looked it up out of curiosity. It had sold 3 years ago for $4.8 million. The current owners had listed it 2 weeks ago for $5.2 million. I stared at the listing photos, the soaring ceilings, the chef's kitchen, the infinity pool overlooking the hills, the master suite larger than my parents' entire first floor. Someday, I thought, maybe not that exact house, but something like it. Something in that neighborhood. Something they would drive past and recognize and realize what they had lost when they chose Jasmine's comfort over their daughter's dignity. It was an absurd goal. Impossible, even. But I bookmarked the listing anyway. The next 6 months passed in a blur of calculated moves and careful planning. I purchased the townhouse with a conventional loan, putting down $40,000 and keeping the rest of my savings for renovations and emergencies. The mortgage payment was $1,300 monthly, less than rent for a comparable place. I moved in on a Saturday morning with help from 2 colleagues who owed me favors. The place was worse than the photos suggested. The kitchen cabinets were water damaged. The carpet reeked of pet stains. The master bathroom's tile was cracked in 3 places. Perfect. I spent every evening and weekend transforming the space. I ripped out the carpet myself, revealing hardwood floors that needed refinishing but were structurally sound. I watched YouTube tutorials and learned to retile the bathroom. I hired a contractor for the kitchen, new cabinets, new countertops, modern appliances, but I painted the walls and installed the backsplash myself. My colleagues thought I was crazy for taking on so much manual labor. They did not understand that every improvement I made was not just to the house, but to my own sense of capability and control. I blocked my parents' numbers after the first week of increasingly aggressive messages demanding I come home and stop this nonsense. Jasmine tried calling from different numbers, leaving voicemails that ranged from apologetic to accusatory. I deleted them all without listening past the first few seconds. At work, I threw myself into my sales territory with renewed intensity. Pharmaceutical sales was cutthroat and demanding, but I had always been good at it. Now I became exceptional. I studied my client physicians' prescribing patterns. I memorized drug interactions and clinical trial data. I showed up to every appointment prepared and professional. My numbers climbed. In the 3rd quarter, I ranked 2nd in the regional division. In the 4th quarter, I ranked 1st. The bonus check arrived in January, $48,000. I deposited it immediately and started researching my next move. The townhouse was now worth $340,000, a $45,000 increase in 6 months. The neighborhood was gentrifying rapidly. I could sell for a quick profit or hold and wait for further appreciation. Instead, I did something more ambitious. I met with a mortgage broker and outlined my plan. Keep the townhouse, rent it out, and use the equity and my increased income to qualify for a second property. Something bigger. Something I could also renovate and either sell or rent. That's aggressive, the broker said, reviewing my financials. But doable. Your income increased significantly this year, and you've built equity fast. If you can get a tenant locked in with a solid lease, you could qualify for another $300,000. What if I wanted to qualify for more? I asked. She raised an eyebrow. How much more? Significantly more. We spent 2 hours running scenarios. With a combination of conventional financing, an investment property loan, and proof of rental income, I could potentially qualify for up to $600,000. If I was willing to take on the risk, and if I could demonstrate reliable cash flow from the townhouse. I listed the townhouse for rent that week at $1,800 monthly, $300 above my mortgage. It was occupied within 4 days by a young couple relocating for work, both with stable jobs and excellent references. I hired a property management company to handle day-to-day issues for 10% of the monthly rent. Then I started hunting for the next property. I expanded my search beyond Austin proper, looking at suburbs and exurbs where prices had not yet caught up to the urban core, but infrastructure improvements were planned. I attended open houses every weekend. I studied tax records and zoning maps. I made offers on 3 properties that fell through due to bidding wars or inspection issues. In March, I found a foreclosure, a 4-bedroom house in a decent school district, listed at $380,000. It needed significant work. The previous owners had abandoned it mid-renovation, leaving exposed drywall, unfinished flooring, and a kitchen that was basically a construction zone. Everyone else saw a disaster. I saw opportunity. I offered $360,000 cash equivalent through creative financing, contingent on inspection. The bank accepted immediately, desperate to unload the property. I threw everything into renovating that house. I took a week of vacation time and worked 16-hour days alongside the contractors I hired. I learned to hang drywall, install flooring, and replace light fixtures. The project consumed me completely, but I had never felt more alive or more purposeful. 10 weeks later, the house was transformed. Modern, move-in ready, and worth approximately $520,000 based on comparable sales. I listed it at $549,000. It sold in 3 days for $560,000. After closing costs, agent fees, and loan payoff, I netted $137,000 in profit. My total liquid assets now stood at $142,000, plus equity in the townhouse. I was 30 years old and had not spoken to my family in almost a year. In June, I received a wedding invitation in the mail at my office. Jasmine was getting married in September. The envelope was addressed to me at my workplace, suggesting they still did not know where I lived. I threw the invitation away without opening the inner envelope. 2 days later, my mother called my work line. "Vivian, please," she said when I answered. "We miss you. Your father is sorry about how things happened. Can't we just talk?" "About what?" I asked, keeping my voice professionally neutral in case colleagues were listening. "About you coming home, about family, about Jasmine's wedding. She wants you to be a bridesmaid." "I already have a home," I said. "And I'm not interested in being anyone's bridesmaid. Is there anything else?" "Why are you being so cold?" Mom's voice cracked. "We're your family." "Family doesn't throw out family members for convenience," I replied. "I need to go. I have a client meeting." I hung up before she could respond. That weekend, I went house hunting again, not for an investment property this time, but for something different. I drove through Westlake Hills slowly, studying the streets and homes. The neighborhood was even more impressive up close. Manicured lawns, luxury vehicles, the quiet confidence of serious wealth. And there it was. The house Dad had admired. The contemporary-style home with floor-to-ceiling windows and a 3-car garage. The for sale sign still stood in the front yard. $5.2 million. I was not there yet. Not even close. But I was closer than I had been a year ago when I packed my bags in silence and left the only home I had known. I pulled out my phone and called the listing agent. "I'd like to schedule a showing," I said. The listing agent met me at the Westlake Hills property on a Thursday afternoon. Her name was Patricia, and she wore the kind of understated, expensive clothing that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. She looked me over with the practiced assessment of someone who had learned to gauge a buyer's seriousness by their shoes and watch. My shoes were good, Italian leather, purchased after my last bonus. My watch was better, a gift I had bought myself after the house flip. I had learned that looking successful was half the battle in rooms where actual success was measured in millions. "This is a significant property," Patricia said as she unlocked the front door. "The current owners are relocating to California for business. They've priced it competitively for a quick sale." I said nothing, letting her lead me inside. The interior was even more stunning than the listing photos suggested. The entryway opened into a massive living area with 20-foot ceilings and windows that framed the hills like living artwork. The kitchen featured professional-grade appliances and a marble island large enough to seat 8 people. The master suite occupied the entire second floor, complete with a spa-like bathroom and a balcony overlooking the infinity pool. "The property sits on 2 acres, Patricia continued, walking me through each room. The outdoor entertainment area includes a built-in kitchen, fire pit, and temperature-controlled wine storage. The 3-car garage has been finished as a workshop and gym space." I took photos with my phone, careful to capture every detail and angle. Patricia watched me with renewed interest. "May I ask what brings you to Westlake Hills?" she asked carefully. "I'm expanding my real estate portfolio," I replied, which was technically true. "I've had success with residential investments, and I'm looking to move into higher-end properties." "This would be quite a leap from residential investments," Patricia observed. "I'm aware." We spent 90 minutes touring the property. I asked detailed questions about the construction quality, the age of major systems, property taxes, and homeowner association requirements. Patricia answered each question professionally, but I could sense her skepticism. As we concluded the tour in the front courtyard, she handed me her card. "If you're seriously interested, I'd be happy to discuss financing options and comparable properties in your actual price range." The dismissal was polite, but clear. She had decided I was not a legitimate buyer for this property. "I'll be in touch," I said simply. I sat in my car for several minutes after she left, staring at the house. $5.2 million. Even with everything I had achieved in the past year, that number felt astronomical, impossible. But I had thought buying my first property was impossible too. I had thought flipping a foreclosure for a $137,000 profit was impossible. I drove home, to the extended stay hotel that had become my permanent residence. It was cheaper than renting an apartment, and I preferred keeping my housing expenses minimal while I accumulated capital. The maid service and included utilities were convenient for my work schedule. That evening, I created a spreadsheet. On one side, my current assets and income. On the other, what I would need to purchase the Westlake Hills property. The gap was enormous, roughly $4 million. But gaps could be closed. The question was how quickly and through what methods. I spent the next 3 months executing an aggressive investment strategy. I purchased another foreclosure, renovated it in 8 weeks instead of 10, and sold it for a $98,000 profit. I found a duplex in an emerging neighborhood, bought it with the investment property loan, and rented both units immediately for a combined monthly income that exceeded the mortgage by $700. My portfolio now included 3 rental properties generating positive cash flow and a track record of successful flips. In November, I incorporated an LLC for my real estate business. It was a psychological shift as much as a legal one. I was no longer just Vivian who sold pharmaceuticals and flipped houses on the side. I was Vivian who owned a real estate investment company with tangible assets and documented success. The pharmaceutical sales continued to provide stable income and health insurance, but increasingly, it felt like the side project rather than the main focus. I hired an accountant who specialized in real estate investors. She reviewed my financials and growth trajectory with impressive thoroughness. "You're doing everything right," she said during our second meeting. "Aggressive, but not reckless. You're building equity and cash flow simultaneously. At this pace, within 3 years, you could have a portfolio worth several million." "What if I wanted to accelerate that timeline?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair, studying me. "There are ways. Partnerships with other investors, private money lending, commercial properties with higher returns. But they all involve significantly more risk." "What kind of partnerships?" "You'd need to find investors with capital who want the returns real estate provides, but lack the time or expertise to manage properties themselves. You provide the knowledge and labor. They provide the funding. You split the profits." "How do I find these investors?" "Networking, real estate investment groups, business conferences, wealthy individuals looking to diversify. It's relationship-based work." I thanked her and left with a new direction to research. That weekend, Jasmine got married. I saw the photos on social media. Her in a white dress that probably cost more than my first car, my parents beaming beside her, the elegant venue with its string lights and floral arrangements. I felt nothing looking at those images. No regret, no longing, no sadness. That surprised me more than anything else. Somewhere during the past year, I had stopped caring about their approval or inclusion. The following Monday, I joined 3 different real estate investment networking groups. I attended my first meeting that Thursday. 20 people in a hotel conference room, mostly men in their 40s and 50s, discussing cap rates and cash-on-cash returns like other people discuss sports scores. I listened more than I spoke during that first meeting. I learned the language, the priorities, the questions serious investors asked. One man mentioned he was looking for someone to manage a portfolio of rental properties he'd acquired through an inheritance but had no interest in operating himself. After the meeting, I approached him. "I couldn't help overhearing your situation. I manage several rental properties and have experience with renovations and tenant placement." His name was Gregory, and he was a corporate attorney with more money than time. We exchanged information. 3 days later, I sent him a detailed proposal outlining my property management experience, my renovation track record, and my fee structure. He hired me to manage 4 properties. The management fees were modest, but the relationship was invaluable. Gregory introduced me to 2 other investors looking for similar services. Within 2 months, I was managing 11 properties that I did not own, but that generated steady income through management fees. More importantly, I was building relationships with people who had capital and who were watching me prove myself reliable and competent. In February, 18 months after I had left my parents' house, Gregory called me about a different kind of opportunity. "I have a colleague who's looking to invest in residential real estate but doesn't want to deal with the operational side," he explained. "She has $400,000 she wants to deploy. I mentioned what you've been doing. She's interested in discussing a partnership." The colleague's name was Diane, and she was a surgeon with a thriving practice and zero interest in landlord responsibilities. We met at an upscale coffee shop downtown, and I came prepared with a presentation outlining potential investment strategies, projected returns, and risk assessments. Diane listened intently, asking sharp questions about market analysis, vacancy rates, and exit strategies. She was not someone who made decisions based on charm or optimism. She wanted data. "What would the partnership structure look like?" she asked finally. "You provide the capital for property acquisition and major renovations," I proposed. I provide the expertise, property management, and labor. We split profits 60-40 in your favor until you've recouped your initial investment plus 10% return. After that, we split 50-50. And you'd have full operational control? With quarterly reporting and pre-approval required for any expenses over $10,000. She considered this for a long moment. I'll need to review this with my attorney. If the terms are solid, I'm interested in starting with one property as a test case. 2 weeks later, we signed a partnership agreement. With Diane's $400,000 and my expertise, we purchased a dated 6-unit apartment building in a neighborhood poised for growth. The building needed significant updating, but was structurally sound and fully occupied with month-to-month tenants. Over 4 months, we renovated each unit as they turned over, modernizing kitchens and bathrooms, while maintaining affordable rent prices that kept vacancy minimal. By June, the building was generating $11,000 monthly in rent, against a mortgage of $6,200 and operating expenses of $1,800. Net monthly profit, $3,200. My share, $1,600. But more valuable than the monthly income was what happened next. Diane was impressed enough with the returns and my management that she introduced me to 3 other medical professionals interested in similar investments. By August, I had partnership agreements with 4 different investors, managing a combined portfolio of 19 properties. My pharmaceutical sales job became increasingly difficult to maintain. I was traveling for showings and renovations, taking calls from tenants and contractors, and spending evenings reviewing financial reports and market analyses. Something had to give. In September, I gave my 2 weeks' notice. My sales manager tried to convince me to stay, offering a promotion and a raise. I declined politely. The pharmaceutical income had served its purpose, providing stability while I built something bigger. Now, the real estate business generated more money and had significantly more growth potential. I was 31 years old and financially independent in a way I had never imagined possible 2 years earlier. But I had not forgotten the house in Westlake Hills. I drove past it occasionally, always at different times of day, watching the light change across those floor-to-ceiling windows. The for sale sign had been replaced with pending in April, breaking my heart slightly. But then in July, the pending rider was removed and the for sale sign returned. The deal had fallen through. I called Patricia, the listing agent. She remembered me, though her tone suggested she still did not take me seriously as a buyer. The property is back on the market at $4.9 million, she informed me. The previous buyers couldn't secure financing. Are you interested in viewing it again? Not yet, I said, but I'm building toward it. What would it take for you to consider me a serious buyer when the time comes? There was a pause. Pre-approval for at least $4 million. Documented liquid assets of at least $500,000. And frankly, a track record that demonstrates you can close on a property in that range. Understood. Thank you for your honesty. I had roughly $370,000 in liquid assets and equity I could potentially access. My portfolio generated approximately $18,000 monthly in net income between management fees and ownership stakes. I was moving in the right direction, but not fast enough. I needed a bigger move. In October, one of my investor partners mentioned a commercial property opportunity, a small retail plaza with 6 units, half vacant, in a location scheduled for significant infrastructure improvements. The asking price was $1.3 million. It's too rich for my blood as a solo venture, Gregory said during one of our quarterly reviews. But if you could put together a group of investors, it could be highly profitable. The area is about to boom with the new transit line. I spent 2 weeks analyzing the property and the market. The numbers were compelling. With strategic tenant placement and modest improvements, the plaza could generate $15,000 monthly in net rent. The risk was the current vacancy rate and the upfront capital required. I pitched the opportunity to my 4 existing investor partners, proposing a syndication structure where each would contribute capital in exchange for proportional ownership shares, with me retaining 20% equity for finding the deal and managing operations. 3 of the 4 agreed. Together with my own contribution, we had enough for the down payment and initial renovations. We closed on the property in December. I spent the next 4 months aggressively marketing the vacant spaces, offering competitive rates and flexible lease terms to establish businesses looking to expand. By April, the plaza was fully occupied, generating $16,200 monthly in net rent against operating expenses and mortgage of $9,800. My 20% share of the net profit, $1,280 monthly. But the real win was the credibility. I had successfully syndicated and managed a commercial property. I had demonstrated I could operate at a higher level than single-family homes and small apartment buildings. My portfolio now included partial or full ownership in 23 properties, with a combined value exceeding $4 million. I was 32 years old and had not spoken to my parents in over 2 years. In May, I received an unexpected email. The subject line read, "Family emergency." I almost deleted it without opening it. But something made me click. It was from Jasmine. Short and direct. Dad had a heart attack. He's stable but in the hospital. Mom thought you should know. Room 412, Austin General. I stared at the email for a long time. I felt something, but I could not identify whether it was concern or simply the ghost of old obligations. I did not go to the hospital that day, or the next. On the 3rd day, I drove there but sat in the parking lot for 20 minutes without going inside. I told myself I was being petty. I told myself I was being strong. Both were probably true. Finally, I went in. Dad looked smaller in the hospital bed, older than I remembered. Mom sat in a chair beside him, holding his hand. She looked up when I entered, her face cycling through surprise, relief, and uncertainty. "Vivian," she breathed. "You came." I heard what happened. "How is he?" "Recovering. The doctors say he'll be fine with lifestyle changes and medication." She stood, approaching me carefully as if I might flee. "Honey, I've missed you so much. Can we talk? Really talk?" Dad opened his eyes. "Vivian?" His voice was weak but clear. "Hi, Dad." "I'm glad you're here." He gestured vaguely toward the other chair. "Sit, please." I sat, maintaining distance. We talked for 30 minutes. They asked where I had been living, what I had been doing. I gave minimal answers, working, staying busy, doing well. I did not mention the properties, or the business, or any of the success I had built. Mom cried at one point. "We handled everything so badly. We were wrong to put you in that position. Your father and I have talked about it so many times. We want you back in our lives." "What changed?" I asked quietly. Dad shifted in his bed. "Almost dying gives you perspective. I realized how much time we've wasted being angry and stubborn. You're our daughter. That should matter more than pride." "It should have mattered then, too," I said. "You're right," Dad admitted. "It should have." Jasmine arrived then with coffee, stopping short when she saw me. "Vivian, oh my God, I didn't think you'd come." "I didn't think I would either." We talked for another hour. It was awkward and uncomfortable and occasionally painful. But it was also the first honest conversation we had had as a family in years. As I prepared to leave, Mom touched my arm. "Will you come to dinner? Once your father's home and recovered? We'd love to see where you're living, catch up properly." I hesitated. The old Vivian would have agreed immediately, eager to rebuild bridges and restore relationships. The new Vivian understood that some bridges were not worth rebuilding, and that restored relationships required more than dinner. "Maybe," I said. "Let me think about it." I left the hospital with mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to reconnect, to have family again. Part of me remembered sitting at that dinner table while they discussed displacing me like I was a piece of furniture. Over the next month, we texted occasionally. polite updates about Dad's recovery, brief exchanges about weather and work, nothing substantial. In July, Mom called. "Your father's doing much better. We'd really like to have you over for dinner. Next Saturday? Just the four of us." I agreed before I could talk myself out of it. Saturday arrived. I drove to my old neighborhood for the first time in over 2 years. Nothing had changed. The same houses, the same streets, the same feeling of modest middle-class comfort that had once been my entire world. I parked in front of their house and sat for a moment, gathering myself. Then I noticed something. The house looked tired. The paint was fading. The lawn needed attention. The front porch had a broken railing I did not remember from before. I knocked rather than walking in. Mom opened the door with a bright smile that seemed forced. "Vivian, come in, come in." The interior looked worse than the exterior. Furniture was more worn than I remembered. The carpet showed traffic patterns. Small maintenance issues everywhere. A loose cabinet handle, a dripping faucet, scuffed baseboards. Dad sat in his recliner, looking healthier than at the hospital, but still diminished somehow. "Welcome home," he said. "Thanks for having me." Dinner was uncomfortable. We made small talk about Dad's health, about Jasmine's job search. Apparently she had been laid off 3 months ago, about neighborhood gossip. Nobody asked about my life beyond surface-level questions. Finally, over dessert, Dad cleared his throat. "Vivian, there's something we wanted to discuss with you." Here it comes, I thought. "Your mother and I are considering downsizing," he continued. "The house is too big for us now, and the maintenance is becoming challenging. We're thinking about selling and moving into a smaller place." "Okay," I said carefully. Mom jumped in. "We thought, since you're doing well, you must be, you look wonderful. Maybe you'd want to buy the house, stay in the family? We could give you a good price." I set down my fork slowly. "What kind of price?" "Well, the house is worth about $550,000 according to assessments. We'd sell it to you for $490,000. That's a significant discount." I did some quick math. They still owed approximately $270,000 on the mortgage based on what I remembered of their financial situation years ago. At $490,000, they would clear roughly $220,000 after selling costs and payoff. "That's generous," I said neutrally. "Can I ask why you're considering selling?" Dad and Mom exchanged glances. "Financial pressures," Dad admitted finally. "Medical bills from the heart attack, some investments that didn't pan out. We thought downsizing made sense." "And you thought I'd want to buy my childhood home?" I asked. "The house you asked me to leave?" Silence fell over the table. "Vivian, we've apologized for that," Mom said softly. "We're trying to move forward. By asking me to bail you out financially?" "That's not what this is," Dad said. But his eyes told a different story. I stood. "Thank you for dinner. I'll think about your offer." I left quickly, before the anger bubbling in my chest could spill out in words I might regret. In my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my hands ached. They had not invited me to reconcile. They had invited me to solve their financial problems. The apologies were not about genuine remorse, but about softening me up for this request. I drove home and spent the evening reviewing my financials. My portfolio was strong. My cash flow was excellent. My liquid assets had grown to $490,000. Almost enough. The next morning, I called Patricia. "Is the Westlake Hills property still available?" "It is. Are you calling as a serious buyer?" "Schedule a second showing, and prepare to receive my pre-approval letter." I spent the next week working with a private lender who specialized in high-net-worth real estate investors. I presented my portfolio, my income documentation, my track record. The numbers were tight, but with creative structuring, using my rental portfolio as collateral and bringing in a small investment partner for 20% equity, We made it work. The pre-approval letter arrived for $4.5 million. I called my parents. I thought about your offer. I'm not interested in buying your house, but I want to make sure we're clear about something. I'm doing very well, better than you apparently realized. I don't need family connections or family money. I built everything myself after you asked me to leave. Mom started to protest, but I continued. I'm not angry anymore. I'm grateful. You forced me to become someone I wouldn't have been otherwise. So thank you for that. I hung up feeling lighter than I had in months. Then I called Patricia. Let's write an offer. The offer process moved faster than I anticipated. I came in at $4.8 million, below asking but with proof of funds and a quick close timeline that made it attractive to sellers eager to relocate. They countered at $4.95. I accepted. The inspection revealed minor issues that I negotiated down to $4.9 million even. Closing was scheduled for 6 weeks out. During those 6 weeks, I felt like I was living in two worlds simultaneously. In one world, I managed my properties, attended investment meetings, and coordinated with contractors. In the other world, I was preparing to purchase a house that represented everything my parents had ever wanted and never achieved. I did not tell them. I did not tell anyone except my attorney and the investment partner, who held 20% equity in the deal. A radiologist named Vincent, who wanted exposure to high-end real estate without operational involvement. 3 weeks before closing, Jasmine called me. Mom told me about your conversation. She's really hurt, Vivian. I'm sure she is, I said, continuing to review a contractor's bid while we talked. Can't you see they're struggling? Dad's medical bills are drowning them. They might lose the house. Then they should list it on the market for full value instead of asking me for a family discount that primarily benefits them. You've really changed, Jasmine said. And I could not tell if it was an accusation or an observation. Yes, I have. I had to. We're family. Doesn't that mean anything? It meant something when I paid for Dad's dental work and your car insurance and the new refrigerator. It meant something when I contributed to household expenses for 6 years. What did it mean when they asked me to leave? Jasmine had no answer to that. 2 weeks before closing, I drove past my parents' house again. The for sale sign was up now, confirming what Jasmine had told me. They were listing it at $535,000, higher than they had offered it to me, trying to maximize their return. I felt nothing looking at that sign. The house held no sentimental value anymore. It was just a structure, aging and ordinary, in a neighborhood I had outgrown. The closing took place on a Thursday morning in a title company office downtown. I signed what felt like hundreds of documents. Vincent signed remotely from his clinic. The wire transfers went through. Keys were handed over. I owned the Westlake Hills house. I sat in my car in the title company parking lot afterward, holding the keys and trying to process what I had just done. $5.2 million in real estate debt, even with investment partners and rental income covering most of the mortgage, was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. But I had done it. 2.5 years after leaving my parents' house with 3 suitcases and 4 boxes, I owned the property they had dreamed about. I drove to the house, my house, and walked through it slowly, room by room. The afternoon light poured through those floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the Italian marble floors and custom millwork. The infinity pool sparkled in the backyard. The master suite balcony offered views that stretched for miles. This was mine. All of it. Earned through work and risk and refusing to accept the limitations others had placed on me. I took a photo from the balcony overlooking the hills and posted it to social media with a simple caption, "New chapter." Within an hour, Jasmine had called 3 times. I ignored the calls. That weekend, I hired movers to transfer my belongings from the extended stay hotel to the house. I did not own nearly enough furniture to fill the space, but I was okay with that. I would acquire pieces gradually, choosing each one deliberately, rather than filling rooms out of obligation. Sunday afternoon, while arranging books in the study, my doorbell rang. I was not expecting anyone. I opened the door to find Mom and Dad standing on my front porch, their expressions cycling between shock and disbelief as they took in the house behind me. "Vivian?" Mom's voice was barely a whisper. "What is this?" "This is my home," I said simply. Dad stared past me into the entryway, his face draining of color. "This is the house. The one from Westlake Hills. The one we used to drive past." "Yes." "You bought it?" Mom asked, still not comprehending. "How could you possibly afford this?" "I built a real estate investment business over the past 2.5 years. I own or manage 23 properties. This house is my primary residence and also serves as equity for my portfolio." They stood frozen, unable to process what I was telling them. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, stepping aside. They entered slowly, like tourists in a museum. I watched them take in the soaring ceilings, the chef's kitchen, the living room with its panoramic windows. Every detail they had admired from the outside was now visible in full. We ended up in the kitchen. I poured water from the refrigerator's built-in filtration system into crystal glasses I had purchased specifically for this moment. "I don't understand," Dad said finally, sitting heavily on one of the island stools. "How did you do this?" "I worked. I took risks. I learned. I built something from nothing." "But where did you get the money to start?" Mom asked. "I had $43,000 in savings when I left your house. Money I saved while living there and contributing to family expenses." I paused. "Money I could have kept contributing if you hadn't asked me to leave." The words landed like physical blows. "We didn't ask you to leave," Mom protested weakly. "We just needed you to be flexible. You gave me an ultimatum. Take the smaller room or find my own place. I chose my own place. Then I chose to build something you could never take away from me." Dad's face had gone from pale to red. "So this is revenge? You bought this house to hurt us?" "No," I said honestly. "I bought this house because I wanted it, because I could, because I built a life where I get to choose what I want instead of accepting what others tell me I should settle for. If that hurts you, that's incidental." "We would have helped you if we'd known you were struggling," Mom said. I laughed, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. I wasn't struggling. That's the point. I was succeeding, spectacularly. But you never asked. You invited me to dinner once in 2.5 years, and that was only to ask me to buy your house at a discount. "We thought we were giving you an opportunity," Dad said defensively. "No, you thought you were solving your financial problems by leveraging family obligation. There's a difference." Silence stretched between us. They looked around the kitchen again, and I could see them calculating, measuring their own lives against what I had achieved. "Jasmine said you're working in real estate now," Mom ventured finally, her voice small. "I own a real estate investment company. I have 4 investment partners and manage a portfolio worth over $4 million. The commercial plaza I syndicated last year generates $16,000 monthly in net rent." Dad shook his head slowly. "How is this possible? You were selling pharmaceuticals." "I was. That provided stable income while I learned real estate investing, bought my first property, renovated it, and built from there. I quit pharmaceutical sales a year ago when my real estate income exceeded my salary and benefits." "Why didn't you tell us?" Mom asked. "Why shut us out completely?" "Because you shut me out first," I said quietly. "You made it clear that Jasmine's comfort mattered more than my stability. That family loyalty only flowed in one direction. So I stopped trying to prove my worth to people who had already decided I was disposable." "That's not fair," Dad said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Isn't it? When did you last ask about my life before you needed something from me? When did you acknowledge the 6 years of rent I paid, the expenses I covered, the times I helped without being asked? They had no answer. I continued, not cruelly, but factually. I learned something important after I left. I learned that I was capable of more than anyone, including myself, had believed. I learned that being reliable and responsible didn't mean being taken for granted. And I learned that the people who truly value you don't wait until they need something to remember you exist. Mom's eyes filled with tears. We love you, Vivian. We always have. Maybe you do. But love without respect is just sentiment, and sentiment doesn't build anything lasting. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the pool and the hills beyond. I used to drive past this house with you, Dad. You'd slow down and point at it, and talk about how someday, when you finally made it, you'd own something like this. Do you remember? He nodded silently. I remembered too. Every time I closed on a property, every time I negotiated a deal, every time I worked 16-hour days renovating a house, I remembered this place and what it represented. Not revenge exactly, but proof. Proof that I could achieve things you thought were impossible. We never said you couldn't achieve things, Mom protested. You didn't have to say it. You showed it when you chose Jasmine's convenience over my presence. When you dismissed 6 years of contributions as if they were nothing. When you waited 2.5 years to contact me, and only did so because you needed something. The words hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. Jasmine's car pulled into the driveway then. I watched through the window as she got out and stood staring at the house, her phone pressed to her ear, probably calling someone to describe what she was seeing. She rang the doorbell moments later. I opened it to find her face flushed with confusion and something that might have been anger. This is insane, she said, pushing past me into the house. You bought the Westlake house? This house? Hello, Jasmine. Yes, I did. She spun to face our parents. Did you know about this? We just found out, Dad said quietly. Jasmine turned back to me. How could you afford this? This is like a $5 million house. 4.9, actually. I negotiated well. But how? She looked genuinely baffled. You were living in a hotel last time we talked. You were working in pharmaceutical sales. That was over 2 years ago. Things change. I gave her the same explanation I had given our parents, watching her face cycle through disbelief, confusion, and finally something that looked like betrayal. So you've been rich this whole time and you never told us? She demanded. While Mom and Dad were struggling with bills, while I was job hunting, you were just sitting on millions? I wasn't sitting on anything. I was working 80-hour weeks building a business, and I wasn't obligated to fund your life or solve problems you never asked me about. We're family, Jasmine said, echoing her earlier argument. Then why am I only hearing from you now that I have something you want? She flinched. That's not why I'm here. Isn't it? You didn't visit me during the 2 years I was building this. You didn't call to check in or ask how I was doing. But the minute you saw this house, you showed up. Just like Mom and Dad showed up when they needed someone to buy their house at a discount. We've been trying to reconnect with you, Mom said. You're the one who kept us at arm's length. Because I learned my value, I replied simply. I learned that giving people access to my life meant risking them taking advantage of my generosity again. So yes, I kept you at a distance. I protected myself. And in doing so, I built something extraordinary. I gestured around the house. This isn't just about real estate or money. It's about proving to myself that I didn't need your approval or validation or support to succeed, that I could build a life on my own terms where nobody gets to decide my worth except me. The afternoon light was fading now, casting long shadows through the windows. My family stood in my kitchen looking lost and small, and I felt an unexpected wave of something that was not quite pity, but close to it. I'm not trying to hurt you, I said more gently. But I'm not going to pretend the past 2.5 years didn't happen. You made choices that showed me where I ranked in your priorities. I made choices in response, Those choices led here. So what now? Dad asked. We just accept that you've written us off? I haven't written you off. I'm standing here talking to you. But I'm not going back to being the reliable daughter who gives without receiving, who helps without acknowledgement, who accepts being disposable as long as she's useful. That's not who you were to us, Mom said, but her voice wavered. Maybe not in your memory, but it's what I experienced. And experience matters more than intention. We talked for another hour, the conversation moving in circles as they tried to understand how I had accomplished what I had, and I tried to help them see why their lack of interest until now hurt more than their original dismissal had. Finally, as the sun set and the automatic lights illuminated the pool outside, I walked them to the door. You're welcome to visit, I said carefully. But I need you to understand that our relationship, if we rebuild one, will be different. It will be on terms where we're equals, not where I'm expected to give while you take. We never meant to make you feel that way, Mom said, tears streaming down her face now. I know, but impact matters more than intent. I hugged her briefly, then Dad, then even Jasmine. They felt like strangers in my arms, familiar but fundamentally disconnected from the person I had become. I watched them drive away in their aging sedan, past the manicured lawns and luxury vehicles that marked this neighborhood as somewhere they had always dreamed of belonging, but never would. The next morning, I woke in the master suite to sunlight flooding through the balcony doors. I made coffee in the chef's kitchen and took it outside to the pool deck. The view stretched across the hills, showing the city below just waking up to Monday morning. My phone buzzed with messages. Vincent checking in about the property, Gregory asking about a potential new investment opportunity, my accountant reminding me about quarterly tax payments, the property management company reporting a successful lease renewal. My life had become exactly what I had built it to be, independent, successful, and entirely my own. I thought about my parents occasionally over the following weeks. They sent texts every few days, trying to rebuild connection. I responded politely, but maintained boundaries. They invited me to Thanksgiving dinner. I declined, saying I had other plans, which was true. I spent the day reviewing financials and planning next year's investment strategy. Around Christmas, I heard through Jasmine that they had sold their house for $510,000, less than they had hoped, but enough to cover their debts and move into a smaller condo. She seemed to expect me to feel guilty about not helping them. Instead, I felt relieved that they had found their own solution. In January, 3 years after I had left their house, I drove past their old neighborhood one final time. The new owners had already repainted and landscaped. It looked fresh and updated, no longer the tired structure my parents had struggled to maintain. I felt nothing looking at it except mild curiosity about the renovations. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party for my investment partners and their spouses. We ate catered food on the patio by the pool, discussing market trends and upcoming opportunities. Nobody mentioned my family or asked about my background. They knew me only as Vivian, who built a multi-million-dollar portfolio before she turned 33. That was enough. Later, after everyone had left and I was cleaning up, I stood on the master suite balcony looking out over the city lights. Somewhere out there, my parents were settling into their new, smaller life. Jasmine was probably scrolling through social media, comparing her circumstances to others. They were living the consequences of choices they had made years ago, choices that seemed small at the time, but had cascading effects they never anticipated. My father's health had deteriorated further after the stress of selling the house and downsizing. The medical bills continued mounting, and his insurance covered less than they had hoped. My mother had taken a part-time job to supplement their reduced retirement income, working retail at 63 years old because they had not planned adequately for their future. Jasmine's marriage had ended after 18 months, when her husband realized she brought more debt than assets to the relationship. She had moved back in with our parents in their 2-bedroom condo, sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room, the very situation I had refused to accept 3 years earlier. The irony was not lost on me. They had pushed me out to make room for Jasmine, and now they were all crammed together in a space none of them wanted, bound by financial necessity rather than choice. I heard these details through occasional messages from extended family who did not understand why I remained distant. I did not explain. Some lessons could only be learned through living them. I looked back at the house behind me. My house, earned through risk and work, and refusing to accept other people's limitations. Some might call what I had done revenge, but revenge implied I had done this to hurt them. The truth was simpler and more complete. I had done this to save myself. The pain they felt was just the cost of lessons learned too late.